The walk that changed everything. The neon skyline of Atlanta shimmered above Amelia Brooks, the evening humidity curling around her skin like an invisible embrace. She had always loved the way the city breathed at night, alive with the rhythm of life from corner bars to high-rise balconies. But tonight was different. Her heels clicked steadily against the cracked sidewalk, and the distant echo felt sharper than usual, as though the very air was warning her. It was almost midnight when Amelia left her best friend Hizaree's birthday dinner, a celebration full of laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of belly-deep storytelling only lifelong friends could share. Her cheeks still held the warmth of red wine, and her spirit floated somewhere between contentment and exhaustion. Her braided bun sat high on her head, the faint shimmer of gold hoops peeking beneath, and her soft beige jumpsuit draped effortlessly over her tall frame. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't loud. She wasn't suspicious. She was just walking home. Her apartment was only 10 minutes away, and she loved these solitary walks, the time to reflect or just let the city hum lull her into peace. Amelia checked her phone. Her fiancé Marcus had sent a text. "Flight delayed. Love you. Be safe." She smiled, fingers hovering over the keyboard to type back, when the first sharp burst of a police siren split the silence. The blue and white glow of a patrol car swept over the pavement ahead. Amelia's steps faltered for a second, her body instinctively tightening. The patrol car crept closer, pacing her. She had felt this before, that ancient gnawing weight passed down through generations, the knowledge that, as a black woman walking alone at night, her mere existence could be seen as a threat. Her heart beat faster, but she told herself to keep walking, to stay calm. She was no criminal. She had nothing to fear. Until the patrol car cut her off at the curb. The door opened, and out stepped Officer Reese, a broad-shouldered white man with a kind of military buzz cut that made him look more machine than man. His face was expressionless, but there was something in the way his eyes narrowed, scanning her from head to toe, that made Amelia's skin crawl. "Ma'am," he said flatly. "Hold up." Amelia stopped, heart thudding hard in her chest. She fought the rising panic, schooling her features into careful calm. "Is something wrong, officer?" Reese's eyes flicked to her purse, to her shoes, to the shape of her hips, then back to her face. "We got a report. Woman matching your description causing some trouble in the neighborhood." "What kind of trouble?" Amelia asked, her voice even. "Break-in." The word hung heavy between them. "Gonna need to see some ID." The moment stretched too long. Amelia didn't argue. She'd been through enough trainings to know how these situations could escalate, even when you followed the rules. Especially when you followed the rules. Slowly, she opened her purse, careful to show every movement of her hands. She pulled out her ID and handed it over. Reese's lips pursed, scanning the license. Something in his face darkened. "Where you headed?" "My apartment. It's 2 blocks that way," Amelia said, motioning. "Out this late by yourself?" "I was at a birthday dinner." Reese stepped closer, too close, flashlight beams sweeping over her face and down her body like a searchlight. "Anyone see you there?" "My friends. The restaurant staff. I have receipts. You can check." He ignored that. "You mind if I look through your bag?" The knot in Amelia's stomach cinched tighter. "Am I being accused of something, officer?" "You fit the description," Reese said again, like it was a spell that made anything legal. "And you're acting kinda jumpy." She wasn't, but her silence was loud. "Go ahead and open your bag." With the same measured calm, Amelia unzipped her purse, holding it open for him to see. Her wallet, lip gloss, phone, charger, and keys were all there, nothing out of the ordinary. Reese's flashlight burrowed into every corner like it was looking for a reason to dig deeper. "Turn around," Reese said suddenly. Amelia froze. "Why?" "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Her breath hitched, adrenaline surging. "What's the charge?" "Detained for questioning," Reese said, voice colder now. "You can sort it out downtown." Amelia's pulse thundered in her ears. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. She had spent her entire adult life studying, training, serving, dedicated to protecting people and upholding justice. And now she was about to become a statistic, cuffed on the street, with no witnesses but the night. Her hands shook slightly as they came together behind her back. The cold steel of the cuffs bit her wrists. A part of her wanted to scream, to demand her rights, to tell this man who she really was. But she knew the rules. Her identity, her real job, was classified. Even now, protocol demanded secrecy. Even now, the system demanded silence. As she was led to the back of the squad car, she caught her reflection in the rear passenger window. Her dark skin, her trembling lips, her proud posture despite it all. She thought about her mother's prayers, her father's lectures about being twice as good, her grandmother's warnings about never giving them a reason. And none of it mattered. The drive was short, but it felt like a spiral into hell. The precinct air was stale, smelling of sweat, bleach, and something metallic beneath it all. The fluorescent lights made everything too bright, too sharp. Amelia sat in a small room, the cuffs removed but her hands still trembling. Through the thin door, she could hear Reese talking to another officer. She was mouthy, tried to walk away. Fits the description to a T. Lies, every word of it. Amelia knew she could end this charade with a single phone call. But her training had drilled caution into her bones. Reveal nothing unless absolutely necessary. Maintain cover at all costs. And she knew the risks. Even if she called her federal contact, even if her true status came to light, the system could twist it, spin it, bury it. She was just another black woman in the system, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Hours passed. A weary detective, Detective Rains, finally entered, his salt and pepper hair framing a face that looked too tired to care. "Miss Brooks," he said, sitting across from her, "walk me through your evening." Amelia told him. Every detail. The dinner, the walk, the sudden stop, the baseless accusations. Rains flipped through the thin folder in front of him. "Officer Reese claims you resisted, raised your voice, refused to comply." "That's a lie," Amelia said, the first crack of heat in her voice. Rains studied her. Something flickered in his eyes. Doubt or maybe curiosity. "There's supposed to be body cam footage, but it's missing." Of course it was. "Do you have anyone who can verify your alibi?" Rains asked. Amelia gave him names. Desiree, the restaurant manager, even the Uber driver who dropped her off nearby. Rains nodded, noting it all. "We'll check it out," he said. "But I need you to stay available." Amelia's pulse pounded. "Am I free to leave?" For now. As Amelia stepped out into the night, the weight of the system still on her back, she knew one thing. They had messed with the wrong woman. She might be a civilian to them, but Amelia Brooks was trained to dismantle lies. And the truth was about to come out. Shadow games and silent wars. The click of her apartment door locking behind her should have brought comfort. Instead, the soft snick sounded like a gun cocking in her ear. Amelia Brooks stood in her dimly lit living room, back pressed against the door, her chest rising and falling too quickly. The silence felt oppressive, like the walls themselves were waiting for her to collapse. Her keys slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. Normally, she would have cared. Normally, she would have bent down, placed them neatly in the small dish by the entryway, and set about her evening rituals. Tea, maybe a warm shower, journaling to clear her mind. Tonight, nothing felt normal. The cold bite of the handcuffs still lingered on her wrists, faint imprints red against her brown skin. She rubbed them absently, her mind replaying the scene in the interrogation room, the thin layer of sweat on her skin refusing to dry. Officer Reese's voice still rang in her ears, smug, certain, dripping with the arrogance of someone who had gotten away with it before. He hadn't just tried to arrest her. He had tried to bury her. Her phone buzzed violently on the coffee table. The screen lit up with her fiancé Marcus' name. The moment she answered, his voice poured out like a dam bursting. "Baby, what the hell happened? Are you okay? Sheriff just called me. Said you were picked up." "Picked up for what?" Amelia swallowed, her throat dry, her voice coming out more hoarse than she intended. It's nothing I can't handle." "Don't do that." His voice softened, but the frustration simmered beneath it. "Don't minimize it. I saw Char's post. They put you in cuffs. Are you serious?" Amelia closed her eyes. "I'm serious. Talk to me. What's going on?" She let herself sink onto the couch, legs folding beneath her, her free hand pressing into her forehead like she could physically push back the headache threatening to bloom. "Officer Reese pulled me over when I was walking home. Said I fit the description of some burglary suspect. It was bogus. He knew it. I knew it." Marcus was silent for a beat. "Did you tell him?" "No," she cut in quickly. "I didn't show my credentials. You know I can't. Not unless my life's in actual danger. It's protocol." "Your life was in danger, Amelia," Marcus said, his voice strained. "You know how these things go. It doesn't take much." She knew. God, she knew. "Listen," she said softly. "I need you to trust me. I'm going to handle this my way. I'm not blowing my cover unless I absolutely have to. And if it comes to that," Amelia exhaled slowly, "then I do what I have to do." The next morning, Amelia sat at her dining table, laptop open, coffee growing cold beside her, her fingers flying over the keys. Her official work email was untouched. Instead, she was deep in research, digging into Officer Reese's history. What she found didn't surprise her. Excessive force complaints, all dismissed. Unlawful stops, all pinned on mistaken identity. Allegations of tampering with evidence in at least 2 cases, one involving a young black man who had been sent to prison for burglary, only to have the conviction overturned when new evidence proved his alibi. Officer Reese had been the arresting officer, but the internal investigation had found insufficient evidence to hold him responsible for planting any of the incriminating materials. A pattern. A grotesque pattern. She took notes, screenshotted public records, and saved them into an encrypted folder. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline building with each new discovery. He wasn't just dirty. He was confidently dirty. The kind of officer who knew the system would protect him. The kind who used that shield to hunt for easy targets. Women like her. That afternoon, she sat across from Linda Pope, a no-nonsense civil rights attorney recommended by one of her sorority sisters. Linda had the presence of a woman who'd seen it all and wasn't afraid to tear it down piece by piece. "I've had my eye on Reese for a while," Linda said after Amelia explained everything. "He's slick, but not too slick. Enough paper trails exist to paint a clear picture if you know where to look." Amelia leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I need to clear my name, but more than that, I need to expose him." Linda's pen tapped rhythmically against her legal pad. "First step, we lock down your alibi. You were at that restaurant with friends all night, right? Receipts, witnesses, timestamps. We'll package it nice and tight." "Already gathered most of it," Amelia said, sliding over a neatly organized folder. Linda's brow lifted, impressed. "You're thorough. You have no idea." They spent the next hour building the framework for Amelia's defense. Linda was confident they could beat the charges, if the DA even moved forward. But, she added, Reese isn't the type to back down quietly. If he feels cornered, he's going to double down. Amelia's stomach nodded. "I figured." Linda hesitated for a moment. "And there's one more thing." "What?" "If this goes to court, and we need to play every card we've got." Linda leaned forward. "Are you willing to go public with your real job?" Amelia's breath caught. It was the question she'd been avoiding. Her work wasn't just classified. It was deliberately obscured, part of a specialized intelligence task force that operated in the shadows, tracking threats both foreign and domestic. She was trained to blend, to disappear, to be just enough of a shadow that no one asked questions, revealing her true role, not just as a federal agent, but as someone with clearance levels higher than most field agents ever saw, would throw her carefully crafted anonymity into the wind. But if it was the only way to save her future, she'd do it. If we have no other option, Amelia said, voice firm, then yes, I'll reveal everything. Linda's gaze softened. You're braver than most. No, Amelia whispered. I'm just tired. That evening, Amelia's phone rang again. This time, it was Detective Rains, the weary but fair investigator who had handled her initial processing. His tone was quiet, almost conspiratorial. Miss Brooks, I wanted to give you a heads up. There's pressure coming down from above to formally charge you with resisting arrest. What? Amelia's voice hardened. There's no evidence. That's the thing, Rains said. The body cam footage from Reese's patrol car. It's gone. She squeezed her eyes shut, rage sparking beneath her ribs. Gone. Vanished. System glitch, supposedly. Of course. Reese had buried it. Why are you telling me this? Amelia asked cautiously. Because, Rains hesitated. Because I believe you. And I've seen this pattern before. You need to be ready. A pause. Thanks for the warning, Amelia said, voice tight. Be careful, Rains said, before the line clicked dead. Amelia stood at her bedroom window long after the call ended, the city stretching below her like a labyrinth of light and shadow. Somewhere out there, Reese was probably celebrating. Smug, sure that the machine would grind her into dust. But he didn't know who he was dealing with. She wasn't just some random black woman walking home. She was Agent Amelia Brooks, a hunter trained to track lies through digital webs and shatter alibis, an analyst who could break down patterns of corruption and stitch them into nooses. She would expose him, and when the time came, the whole world would know exactly who she was. The war beneath the badge. The courtroom was smaller than Amelia expected, which made the suffocating air even harder to breathe. It was the kind of room designed for efficiency, not justice. Bland beige walls, scratched wooden benches, and the steady hum of an ancient ceiling fan rattling overhead. The fluorescent lights were cold and unkind, washing out the faces of everyone present, reducing them to pallid shades of themselves. But Amelia Brooks felt every eye on her, as if they were burning brands pressed into her skin. She sat at the defense table, back straight, hands folded neatly on her lap, the very picture of poise. Inside, her nerves were a live wire, crackling with anticipation and fury so sharp it nearly cut her in half. Beside her, Linda Pope was a wall of calm authority, her navy suit crisply pressed, her expression unreadable behind the rim of her glasses. Across the room, Officer Reese sat with the prosecution, his smug confidence radiating like a toxic fog. His arms were folded, one foot tapping lazily against the floor, his gaze cutting toward Amelia every few minutes. The message was clear. I own this room. I own this process. I own you. Amelia didn't blink. Not once. The hearing was procedural, a chance for the prosecution to argue why the charge of resisting arrest should move forward to trial. Simple in theory, but the weight of what this hearing represented pressed against Amelia's chest like a fist. It wasn't just about her freedom. It was about whether truth could survive in a system bent to protect its own, whether justice still had a pulse beneath layers of bureaucracy and whispered deals. The judge, Judge Malcolm Trent, a graying man with a permanent frown carved into his face, called the session to order. Ms. Brooks, you are here today because the state wishes to proceed with charges of resisting arrest stemming from an incident on the evening of June 14th, Judge Trent began, his voice gravelly with age. You have counsel present, and the state is represented by Assistant District Attorney Franklin. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Linda said, her voice clear and confident. We'll start with the prosecution, the judge said. Ada Franklin stood, adjusting his tie as though it were suffocating him. He wasn't old, but he carried the wariness of someone too jaded for his years. Your Honor, the state believes we have sufficient cause to proceed. Officer Reese identified the defendant near the scene of a reported break-in. When approached, Ms. Brooks displayed erratic behavior, refused lawful commands, and attempted to flee the scene. Lies, every word of it. Amelia's jaw clenched, her knuckles white beneath the table. The sheer audacity of Reese, to invent resistance from whole cloth and present it as fact, was nearly breathtaking. Ada Franklin continued. The arresting officer's report, along with corroborating testimony, supports our claim that Ms. Brooks resisted a lawful stop. In the absence of body cam footage, we rely on Officer Reese's sworn statement. The absence of body cam footage, the prosecution's flimsy foundation balanced on that single rotten plank. Amelia's stomach twisted at the calculated convenience of it all. Linda stood without fanfare. Your Honor, we intend to show that the charges are without merit. My client was cooperative throughout the encounter, as verified by third-party witnesses, and no objective evidence exists to support the claim of resistance. She paused just long enough for the weight of her words to settle. In fact, Linda continued, we contend that Officer Reese's account is not only inconsistent but deliberately fabricated. A ripple of murmurs moved through the handful of spectators. A few local reporters had shown up. The story of a young black woman facing off against the APD had begun to leak into the public consciousness, particularly after a community blog picked up the story of Amelia's arrest. Amelia had seen the headlines. Another false arrest. Atlanta woman challenges police narrative. Her stomach had twisted at the attention, but she knew it was necessary. The judge raised a hand for silence. Miss Pope, let's stick to the matter at hand. Present your argument. Linda gestured toward Amelia. My client has no criminal record. She holds a stable professional career, pays taxes, and has never had a history of resisting or evading law enforcement. In fact, my client has a deep understanding of law enforcement procedures. Reese's brow furrowed slightly at that, the first sign of uncertainty cracking his mask. Additionally, Linda continued, we have secured sworn statements from witnesses who can verify her whereabouts at the time of the alleged break-in. None of those statements suggest any suspicious behavior on her part. The judge nodded slightly. We'll hear from those witnesses shortly. Lastly, Linda said, her voice hardening, we will present evidence that Officer Reese has a documented history of misconduct, particularly in cases involving racial profiling and missing body cam footage. That last line hit the room like a dropped hammer. Reese's foot stopped tapping. The prosecution objected, of course, claiming the officer's past was irrelevant to this particular case. But Linda argued it was critical, a pattern of behavior that established not only motive but method. Judge Trent, surprisingly, allowed it, at least for now. The first witness called was Desiree Thomas, Amelia's best friend, who testified about the birthday dinner and the Uber ride Amelia had taken just blocks from her apartment. Her voice was steady, but Amelia could see the anger simmering beneath her friend's polished surface. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't acting weird. She was just trying to get home, Desiree said firmly. Next came the restaurant manager, who produced time-stamped receipts showing Amelia's presence at the restaurant during the break-in window. Combined, the timeline built an airtight alibi. But the real moment came when Linda called Detective Raines to the stand. Raines took his seat, his tired eyes flicking once to Amelia before settling on the judge. Detective, Linda began, you were the investigating officer the night Ms. Brooks was brought into custody. Is that correct? Yes. Did you review the body cam footage? Raines shifted slightly. It was missing. Missing, Linda repeated. What explanation were you given? Technical malfunction. Is that common? Raines hesitated. Not particularly. Detective, Linda's voice was soft but sharp. Off the record, do you believe Ms. Brooks resisted arrest that night? The prosecution objected. but Judge Trent allowed it. "No," Raines said bluntly. "Based on her demeanor and the lack of evidence, I saw no reason to believe she resisted." Another ripple of murmurs. But then Linda played her hand. "We have one final witness," she said. "Officer Xavier Mitchell." Reese's posture changed instantly. Shoulders tensing, jaw locking. Amelia felt her pulse quicken as Xavier Mitchell walked into the courtroom. His eyes darted nervously toward Reese, then back to Amelia. Under oath, Xavier's voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. "I saw the dashcam footage," he said, "before it disappeared." "And what did you see?" Linda asked. "She was calm," Xavier said. "Hands up. Compliant. She asked if she was under arrest, but she never yelled, never ran." "And how did that footage vanish?" Linda asked. Xavier swallowed hard. "I don't know exactly, but Officer Reese had access to the system before it was reported missing." Reese shot daggers at him from across the room. Amelia could almost feel the walls closing in on Reese, the weight of his lies finally cracking beneath the truth. But she knew they weren't done yet. The judge looked weary but resolute. "I'm going to adjourn to review testimony and evidence before deciding if this case should proceed to trial." As the room emptied, Amelia stood slowly, locking eyes with Reese. His smirk was gone, replaced with barely contained rage. She leaned slightly toward him as they passed. "You should have picked someone else," she whispered. He didn't reply. But Amelia knew. The war wasn't over yet. The weight of truth and the cost of secrets. The courthouse door clicked shut behind Amelia Brooks, but the echo followed her into the humid Atlanta afternoon. The weight of it, the tension that had been building with every word spoken in that courtroom, clung to her skin like the thick summer air. She took a deep breath, the kind meant to cleanse. It didn't. Beside her, Linda Pope's heels struck the pavement with the kind of crisp certainty Amelia wished she felt. Linda walked like a woman who'd fought 100 battles and knew exactly how to win this one. "We made a dent today," Linda said softly, not breaking stride. "But Reese isn't done." "Neither am I," Amelia murmured. A low hum of conversation rose from the small cluster of reporters stationed near the courthouse steps. Their cameras were lowered, for now, but the eager gleam in their eyes said they were waiting for something bigger. They sensed a storm brewing, and Amelia Brooks was the eye. "Amelia," one reporter called out, stepping forward cautiously. "Any comment on today's hearing?" Linda answered before Amelia could. "No comment at this time." Amelia offered a polite, tight-lipped smile, a mask she perfected long before this ordeal began, and stepped into the waiting car. Marcus was at the wheel, his fingers tapping nervously against the steering wheel. His tension was contagious. "How bad was it?" he asked the moment the door closed. "Bad enough," Amelia said, her voice low. "But not the worst." They drove in silence for several minutes, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound filling the car. Marcus kept glancing at her, his brow creased in concern. "Are you going to tell them?" he asked finally. Amelia didn't answer right away. She didn't need to ask what he meant. It was the question that had been circling her mind ever since Reese slapped those cuffs on her wrists. Was it time to pull back the curtain? Was it time to reveal exactly who she was, what she was? The civilian life Amelia had carefully built around herself had always been part truth, part fiction. By day, she was Amelia Brooks, data consultant, Howard University graduate, devoted daughter, and reliable friend. But beneath that ordinary facade lay Special Agent Amelia Brooks, a highly trained intelligence officer with the Strategic Threat Assessment Division, a specialized unit operating under the jurisdiction of both the FBI and the National Security Council. Her expertise was in high-threat domestic infiltration, a niche field where only the most adaptable agents thrived. Amelia didn't just investigate criminals. She became them when necessary, embedding herself into cells, blending into extremist groups, moving like a shadow in places no badge could follow. And all of it, every operation, every risk, every scar, had required secrecy. That was the deal she made when she took the oath. Secrecy was survival. But now secrecy was a cage. "I don't know yet," Amelia said finally, voice soft but sharp-edged. "If they push me into a corner, I won't have a choice." Marcus's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "I hate that it has to come to that." "So do I." The whisper campaign begins. Back at her apartment, Amelia's phone vibrated constantly. Texts from her friends, emails from her attorney, and a growing tide of messages from community activists and civil rights organizations who had gotten wind of her case. The story had leaked in full. Black woman falsely arrested during routine walk home. Officer with troubled past at the center of new controversy. It was bigger than her now. Her name was becoming a rallying cry, even though she hadn't asked for it. Amelia stared at the screen, scrolling through messages from people she didn't know. Mothers of sons who'd been profiled. Young black women who feared walking alone. Former officers who left the force because they couldn't stomach what they saw. The weight of it all settled in her chest, heavy and unrelenting. One message caught her eye. "Sayer Mitchell. They told me to stay quiet. They're pressuring me to change my statement. Reese has friends in high places." Her stomach clenched. She knew it was only a matter of time before Reese and his allies started playing dirty. They couldn't erase Xavier's testimony, but they could break him, isolate him, threaten his career, make his life so unbearable that silence felt like survival. Amelia typed back quickly. "Stay strong. I've got your back. We'll bring this whole thing into the light." Her hands shook slightly as she set the phone down. The truth was, she didn't know if she could protect him. Not yet. Not until she knew exactly how far Reese's reach extended. The thin blue shield. That evening, Amelia sat in her living room, laptop open, a glass of water untouched beside her. The screen glowed with a meticulously compiled dossier, every complaint, every allegation, every half-buried rumor tied to Officer Reese. But it wasn't just Reese. There were others, a cluster of names repeated across case files. Arresting officers, reviewing supervisors, internal affairs investigators who somehow always found insufficient evidence. It wasn't a single bad cop. It was a network, a silent conspiracy that stretched from patrol cars to boardrooms. And Amelia Brooks, a lone woman with too much truth in her hands, was standing right in the middle of it. Her phone rang again. Linda this time. "They're pushing for a fast-track indictment," Linda said, skipping any greeting. "What?" Amelia's heart slammed into her ribs. "Why?" "Pressure from above," Linda said grimly. "I suspect Reese is calling in favors. They want this tied up before it gets too messy." Amelia closed her eyes. "Which means they want to railroad me." "Exactly." Silence hung between them, thick with unspoken fears. "Linda," Amelia said quietly, "it might be time." Linda didn't ask what she meant. "Are you sure?" "No," Amelia admitted. "But if this system is willing to destroy me to protect him, then the system deserves to know who I really am." A long pause. "All right," Linda said finally. "I'll prepare for it. If they move forward with the indictment, we play our trump card." The broken shield. The following morning, Amelia met with Detective Rains in a small diner off Auburn Avenue. The booth was cracked, the coffee lukewarm, but the privacy was priceless. "You need to know," Rains said quietly, leaning in. "Internal affairs is dragging their feet. There's a reason Reese has gotten away with so much. He's got someone high up covering for him." "Who?" Amelia asked. Rains shook his head. "I can't prove it yet, but it's someone in the chain of evidence. Whoever's tampering with those body cam files, they're not acting alone." Amelia's stomach churned. It was bigger than she thought. Bigger than Reese. It was a pipeline of planted evidence, missing footage, and rewritten reports. "How far are you willing to go?" Rains asked softly. Amelia met his eyes, the weight of her decision settling like iron in her chest. All the way, she said, breaking the silence. That night, Amelia sat on the edge of her bed, fingers tracing the edges of a small leather case hidden inside her nightstand. She opened it slowly, the Federal Bureau of Investigation emblem glinting beneath the soft light. It wasn't just a badge. It was her last defense, the only weapon she had left. She placed it beside her, heart thudding, the decision fully made. If they wanted to silence her with lies, she would drown them in truth. The real Amelia Brooks, the one who had worn wires in cartel hideouts, decrypted terror cells' plans in the dead of night, and taken oaths no civilian could imagine, was stepping into the light. No more shadows. The unmasking of Amelia Brooks. The morning of the indictment hearing arrived wrapped in an eerie pre-dawn silence, the kind of silence that hangs in the air before a storm rolls in. Amelia Brooks sat at her small dining table, her fingers curled around a steaming mug of tea, but she hadn't taken a sip. The aroma of chamomile barely registered. The words on her phone screen blurred together, not from sleep deprivation, but from the sheer weight of it all. News articles, opinion pieces, social media threads dissecting her case like scavengers picking apart fresh roadkill. Her face, that carefully crafted mask of ordinary civilian life, had become a symbol, not because of who she was, but because of what had been done to her. The Atlanta woman who resisted, or did she? The case of Amelia Brooks, routine stop or racial targeting. How far will the city go to protect its own? Each headline tugged at something deep inside her, a mix of fury, exhaustion, and a quiet, simmering fear. They still didn't know the whole story. They saw a black woman, and that was enough for them to draw lines. Some saw her as a victim, others a threat. No one knew the truth. That was about to change. The courthouse, the Fulton County Courthouse, loomed ahead like a monolith, its glass reflecting the gray sky, the oppressive humidity curling the edges of Amelia's carefully straightened hair. She wore a black tailored suit, sharp lines, no nonsense, and deliberately plain. No jewelry, no embellishments, just her and the truth she carried like a loaded weapon. Marcus walked beside her, his protective silence louder than any words he could have offered. His presence was steady, an anchor she clung to in the storm. Linda Pope was waiting by the courthouse steps, her expression more guarded than usual. Her tablet was tucked under one arm, her phone in the other hand, and the slight crease between her brows signaled what Amelia already suspected. The prosecution was coming for blood. "Good morning," Linda said, though her tone didn't match the words. "Morning," Amelia replied softly. "What's the latest?" Ada Franklin wants to proceed with the indictment, Linda said as they climbed the courthouse steps. They think the public attention makes this case worth pursuing. If they can convict you, they get to parade it as proof that the system works. Works for who? Amelia asked, though she knew the answer. Linda gave her a knowing look. We're ready. If they want a fight, they'll get one. The indictment hearing. The courtroom was packed. More reporters than Amelia expected, their camera lenses hungry for a glimpse of scandal. Community leaders had shown up too, filling the wooden benches along with a smattering of activists, including a few familiar faces from the local Black Lives Matter chapter. And of course, Officer Reese was there, his posture unnervingly relaxed for a man at the center of so much controversy. His eyes followed Amelia as she entered, the corners of his mouth twitching in something that wasn't quite a smirk, more like a dare. He was still confident that the system would protect him, the way it always had. Amelia took her seat beside Linda, spine straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her pulse hammered against her ribcage, but her face betrayed nothing. The judge, Judge Trent, called the session to order, his gavel falling like a thunderclap in the crowded room. "Counsel, are both parties ready to proceed?" Linda stood. "The defense is ready, Your Honor." Ada Franklin followed. "The state is ready." The judge nodded, scanning the room. This hearing will determine whether sufficient evidence exists to formally indict Ms. Brooks on charges of resisting arrest and obstruction of justice. The words felt surreal. Amelia, who had trained agents to withstand terrorist interrogations, who had drafted operational plans that protected national security, now sitting in a courtroom fighting to prove she wasn't a criminal for walking home. Ada Franklin began with a dry recitation of Officer Reese's account. According to Reese, Amelia had matched the description of a burglary suspect, acted evasively, and then resisted arrest when questioned. It was a story built on manufactured fear, stitched together with the same convenient vagueness that had condemned countless innocent people before her. But this time was different. This time, the wrong woman had been targeted. Linda stood smoothly when the prosecution finished, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Your Honor, before we proceed further, the defense requests to present critical information about Ms. Brooks' background. The prosecution objected instantly. Irrelevant. Highly relevant, Linda countered. This case hinges entirely on my client's alleged conduct during the stop. Her background, her training, and her professional expertise directly inform her actions that night. The judge glanced between them. I'll allow it. The prosecution fumed silently. Linda stepped to the center of the courtroom, her voice steady but ringing with undeniable weight. Ms. Brooks is not just a private citizen walking home that night. She is, in fact, a highly trained federal agent working with a specialized division within the U.S. intelligence community. A ripple swept through the room. Reporters whispered frantically, pens flying across notepads, phones raised to capture every word. The energy shifted instantly, curiosity colliding with disbelief. Agent Amelia Brooks, Linda continued, is a senior intelligence officer with years of experience in high-risk operations involving domestic and international threats. Her training includes advanced de-escalation techniques, surveillance evasion, and extensive legal and procedural education, all of which make the claim that she would irrationally resist a routine stop not only unlikely, but preposterous. The courtroom was silent, save for the frantic tapping of keyboards. Amelia kept her eyes locked on Reese. For the first time, he looked shaken. Linda placed a slim black folder onto the evidence table, Amelia's personnel file, stamped with the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, her official credentials front and center. The judge flipped through the folder, brow raised. This is verified. Directly from her agency, Linda said. Every word. Ada Franklin stammered, trying to recover. Her profession doesn't preclude her from committing a crime. Correct, Linda said. But it does mean she knew exactly how to handle a lawful police stop, which is why she did. Calmly, cooperatively, until Officer Reese manufactured a confrontation. Linda paused, then delivered the final blow. And since Agent Brooks holds top-level clearance, I should also note that her body-worn security tracker, which activates during all off-duty law enforcement encounters, recorded audio of the event. Gasps. Even Amelia wasn't ready for that reveal. Linda had kept it in her back pocket. Where is this audio? Judge Trent asked. Submitted to the court this morning, Linda said. The defense is prepared to play it. The courtroom held its collective breath as the bailiff set up the small speaker, a press of a button, and suddenly Amelia's voice filled the room. Calm, clear, professional. Officer, am I under arrest? A pause. Reese's voice followed, gruff but audible. Just cooperate, and we'll see where this goes. Amelia's voice again. I'm just walking home. I have my ID. I can answer any questions you have. The recording continued. No yelling, no resistance. The entire encounter lasted less than 2 minutes before Reese cuffed her. By the time the recording ended, the mood in the room had shifted completely. The judge's face was grim. The prosecution scrambled for a rebuttal. But there was none. They had gambled on Reese's word against Amelia's. Now Reese's word was worthless. The judge leaned forward. At this time, The court finds insufficient evidence to support proceeding with the charges against Ms. Brooks. The case is dismissed. The gavel came down. The courtroom erupted, reporters shouting questions, community leaders cheering. Amelia barely heard any of it, because across the room, Officer Reese was standing stiffly, his face beet red with fury. He knew. This wasn't over. But neither was she. Truth unchained. Amelia Brooks didn't feel victorious when the gavel slammed down, declaring her innocence. She didn't feel relieved when the charges were dismissed, or even when the cameras outside the courthouse captured her raised chin and the quiet defiance in her eyes. The storm inside her was far from over. The air outside was thick with the kind of humidity only Atlanta summers could summon, but it barely touched Amelia's skin. Every breath felt thin, stretched over the weight of what came next. Reese was cornered. His lies had collapsed under the weight of her truth, but his downfall was just a crack in the dam. The water was still rising. As reporters shouted her name, thrusting microphones in her face, Amelia stood tall, her fingers curling tightly around the edges of her black leather purse. The same purse she'd clutched the night Reese shoved her into the back of his patrol car. Marcus stood beside her, his protective presence radiating like heat off asphalt. Linda Pope flanked her other side, already intercepting the first wave of reporters. "No statements today," Linda said firmly, guiding Amelia down the courthouse steps. "Please respect Agent Brooks' privacy." That single word, agent, rang like a gunshot across the crowd. Agent. The secret was out. The veil that had protected her for so long, the thin cover story of a data consultant, the carefully curated anonymity, had been burned away. She had been unmasked, not as a victim, but as a warrior. And there was no turning back. The department starts to crack. The day after the hearing, Amelia's face was everywhere. Cable news hosts dissected the case, panels debated racial profiling, and social media exploded with commentary. #Justice for Amelia trended for 48 hours straight. But the real storm was brewing inside the Atlanta Police Department itself. Detective Raines called her at sunrise. Reese's internal affairs file got reopened. He said, his voice low but edged with something close to relief. "They're not just looking at your case anymore." "How deep does it go?" Amelia asked, sitting at her dining table, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Raines hesitated. "There's a network, officers, supervisors, even someone in the evidence control unit. They've been covering for each other for years, destroying footage, ghostwriting reports, framing innocent people, especially black and brown residents, to pad their numbers." Amelia's stomach clenched, and Reese. "He's the blunt instrument," Raines said. "But the brains, that's higher up. It's a whole ecosystem." "Do you have names?" "Not yet," Raines admitted, "but internal affairs is scrambling. Reese's fall is going to expose a lot of dirt." Amelia's fingers tightened around the mug. She knew how these things worked. If Reese started to feel truly cornered, he wouldn't just go down quietly. He'd take people with him. The question was, would the system sacrifice him to protect itself, or would it crumble under the weight of its own rot? Reese's last move. 2 days later, Amelia found out just how desperate Reese had become. She was leaving Linda Pope's office, stepping into the sun-drenched parking lot, when a voice called out from the far edge of the lot. "Agent Brooks." She froze, the name still foreign to hear out loud in her civilian life. Turning, she saw him. Officer Reese, no longer in uniform, his department-issued SUV absent, his badge already suspended pending review. But his presence still carried weight, a dark gravitational pull that sent every nerve in Amelia's body on high alert. "You cost me everything," Reese said, voice flat. "No," Amelia said, her heels clicking steadily as she approached him. "You cost yourself everything." Reese's face twisted, a flash of rage breaking through his forced calm. "Do you really think they're going to fix anything? They'll throw me to the wolves and keep the machine running. Maybe, Amelia said softly, but it won't run as quietly. He took a step closer and Marcus, waiting near her car, moved instinctively to intercept, but Amelia raised a hand. She wanted to hear whatever final threat Reese thought he could make. You think you're special because you work for the feds. Reese sneered. You're just a tool they'll toss when you're no longer useful. You're not a hero, Brooks. You're just lucky. Amelia's gaze didn't waver. Luck didn't expose your lies, officer. The truth did. He opened his mouth to reply, but something in her eyes made him hesitate. Not fear. Recognition. She was no longer the woman he thought he could bully into silence. She was a trained weapon, and now fully unmasked. Reese backed away. He knew. The call from Quantico. That night, her work phone, the one rarely used outside secure channels, rang. The number was one she knew by heart. Agent Brooks. Came the calm voice of her division chief. Sir, you handled yourself well. Thank you. There was a pause. We're offering you a position in the Civil Rights Division, he said. It's a liaison role, bridging federal investigations with local law enforcement misconduct cases. Your first-hand experience gives you perspective. Amelia's breath caught slightly. I didn't know there was an opening. There wasn't, her chief said, until now. It was an olive branch, not just from the Bureau, but from the system itself. They weren't just offering her a role. They were offering her a chance to be the change, from the inside out. It's yours if you want it, he said. Think it over. I will. When she hung up, the weight in her chest shifted, not gone, just repositioned. She was no longer fighting to clear her name. Now she had the chance to rebuild the bridge they tried to burn under her feet. The community's voice. Before she could decide, Amelia found herself drawn to a gathering in Old Fourth Ward Park. Community activists had organized a vigil-turned rally, partly in her honor, partly for every name that didn't get justice. Sheriff was there, holding a sign that read, We Walk Too. Amelia stood at the edge of the crowd, unseen at first, until a teenage girl spotted her and whispered urgently to her friends. Slowly, the crowd's attention shifted, not to the stage, but to her. A chant started. Say her name, Amelia Brooks. It grew, rolling through the park like thunder. Amelia's throat tightened, her vision blurring for a moment. She didn't want to be a symbol, but they needed her to be one. She stepped forward, accepting a microphone someone offered. The crowd hushed. I didn't want to stand here, Amelia said, her voice cracking slightly. I never wanted my name to be chanted or my story to be a headline. I wanted to walk home safely. The crowd murmured in agreement. But I'm standing here because I can, she said, voice strengthening. Because I know how lucky I am to still be breathing. And because too many of us, too many of you, never get to tell your side of the story. A pause. I'm not just Amelia Brooks, she said. I'm also Agent Brooks, a federal investigator trained to uncover the truth. And I promise you, I will not stop uncovering it. Not here. Not anywhere. The applause was thunderous. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. The road ahead. 2 weeks later, Amelia packed a small bag. She would spend time in D.C., training for her new role. But her apartment in Atlanta would remain home, because this was her battlefield. Marcus kissed her forehead before she left. Proud of you. Thank you, she whispered. But I'm not done yet. Because somewhere out there, another officer was pulling over another black woman for walking home. And this time, the system wouldn't get away with it. Not while Agent Amelia Brooks was watching.